Thank you, Brianna. Hello, I'm Gail Schickley, and welcome to Solo Arts Heal, where we celebrate the healing power of the arts through performance and talkbacks that offer resources for our audiences live here on the Marsh stream and on the Marsh YouTube channel available worldwide. Tonight, we feature New York-based singer, songwriter, poet, and storyteller Matt Butler in Reckless Sun, his 60-minute solo show described as a 21st century version of On the Road meets Folsom Prison Blues. Reckless Sun tells the story about how Matt's concert at Albany County Jail led to over 100 performances in jails and prisons across the country. He's been featured on NPR Morning Edition, The Bluegrass Situation, and PBS, with Spin saying that Butler is doing something special for the American arts after recently adding him to their albums and Artists of the Year lists. This show, Reckless Sun, was inspired by Matt's journey, performing over 100 concerts in jails and prisons across the country. Through powerful combination of spoken word and song, Reckless Sun humanizes the experience of the incarcerated by giving them voice and telling their stories, turning a compassionate eye to their lives before, during, and after their time behind prison walls. The hope is that the performance evokes empathy and understanding for those who are all too often considered out of sight and out of mind. Reckless Sun is more than just a show. It's a calling that prompted Matt to found the nonprofit Art That Serves to bring the arts to prison populations. So we'll begin tonight with Matt's 20-minute live excerpt of Reckless Sun, followed in conversation about how the show was developed, his nonprofit Art That Serves, and more, as we together embrace the healing power of the arts. So ladies and gentlemen, now please join me in welcoming, with his performance excerpt of his solo show, Reckless Sun, Matt Butler.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Matt Butler, and I'm a singer-songwriter from New York City. Thank you very much, Gail, for the introduction. And for the better part of a decade now, I have been performing concerts in jails and in prisons all over the country. In order to describe that experience and to tell some of the stories that I've heard along the way, I wrote this show, Reckless Sun, that you're going to see an excerpt of tonight. Typically when I perform it for either an incarcerated or a public audience, it begins with me saying something along the lines of, every time I walk into a jail or a prison, I feel afraid. I feel small. I doubt myself. I feel silly for even presuming that I have the power to make a difference, but what helps me to walk through the fear is the thought that if just one person gets something out of the gig, if just one person connects, feels seen, feels heard, just one person feels a little less alone, then it's worth it. And not just the gig. No, not just the gig, but everything that has ever led up to it is worth it. I grew up in a quiet town where most folks don't wanna stick around, except for guys like my dad. Our hometown pride's all he ever had. I was a boy, one night he came home and said, I lost my job and your mama's gone. He pressed that bottle into my hands. He looked me in the eyes and he said, son, yeah, it's time to be a man. Now, for as long as I can remember, I have felt like a child sleepwalking through life with no real sense of purpose, no sense of who I am and my place in the world. Tonight I'm going to tell you the story of what happened when I met some people who felt the same way. It started in November of 2016 when I played a concert in the Sheriff's Heroin Addiction Recovery Program at the Albany County Jail, the Sharp Unit. Now I have no real criminal background. I got arrested once at the end of my senior year of high school and got out of bookings just in time to make it to my graduation ceremony, but bit of a heart attack from my parents is really the worst that came to that. Despite not having any real street cred, when I walked into that jail and started singing, the men of the sharp unit started listening. It was the songs that let them know we had something in common, and that afternoon something in me was activated. I knew I would never be the same. Shortly afterward, the sheriff and some local news crews started spreading the word, and I started getting invitations to perform in more facilities. It wasn't long before this grassroots network of friends were putting me up, and they were shipping me out all over the country. When I turned 16, I dropped out of school. I was never any good at following rules. I started selling pills to pay my rent. I started taking them too, and I've been doing it ever since, till I got busted in some parking lot. Cops said, guys like you either die or get caught, and he locked those cuffs around my hands. He looked me in the eyes and he said, son, it's time to be a man. Oh yeah, yeah, time to be a man. Yeah, oh yeah, it's time to choose, boy, it's time to take a stand. Yeah, he said it's time to find out who I really am. Time to be a man. Oh yeah, yeah, time to be a man. Oh yeah. On a hot summer day out in the yard of a county detention center, a guard introduced me to a very cool-looking young inmate with a square jaw and slick back hair. AJ was handsome, even though he was missing most of his back teeth, which was obvious every time he laughed or smiled. Before she introduced us, the guard told me that he just found out the day before his oldest brother had died of an overdose, and he was heartbroken because he was going to have to miss the service. You see, he'd been arrested when he was 17, and he was now halfway through a 4-year sentence. Before that, he'd spent most of his life in juvenile facilities, and he had no idea what he was going to do for work when he got out, because the only job that he'd ever had was cutting lumber, a job where he and everyone he worked with got high on amphetamines. The rest of his brothers were either dead, strung out, or in jail. His mother was a heroin addict, and he hadn't seen her in years. And that's when he let slip what I think was the most profound detail of his entire story, and of course he skimmed over it as if it were inconsequential, like he was just telling me what he had for lunch. But AJ didn't know how to read, as if the deck weren't already stacked against him. He told me all of this over the sound of the guards doing taser practice in the yard, each sentence of his punctuated by the thuds of wired prongs pummeling these canvas target dummies. But to AJ, that was just the sound of home. Last time I was on these streets, I was only 17 years old. But in the eyes of the law, that was old enough to be tried as an adult. Now after all these years, folks round here still remember who I am. Sometimes I catch them watching me close, so they just act like they don't give a damn. 'Cause Lord, I've been gone so long. Now this place don't feel like home. I've been gone so long, and all I want is to move on. Early in the morning I go looking for work. I bum ride since I lost my car. Hitch a couple miles to my P.O. just to tell her no luck so far. I served my time and I paid my debt, but there's always something more I owe. Yeah, it seems like all I can do is what I've always done and just go back to what I know. 'Cause Lord, I've been gone so long. Now this place don't feel like home. I've been gone so long. And all I want is to move on. And all I want is to move on. CCI. CCI stands for Chillicothe Correctional Institution, or Chili for short. A nickname that takes on a real sense of menace when you realize that this is the place where Ohio sends those that have been sentenced to death. Now, even though they weren't allowed to attend the show, I can tell you that that place, it just never lets you forget those men are right down the hall. For visual reference, The Shawshank Redemption was filmed at the old Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, a facility that is nearly identical to the one at Chillicothe. So if you've seen that movie, you have a pretty good idea of what this next stop on the tour looked like. After entering through what I could only describe as these Gothic prison gates, I got brought into an auditorium that looked as if nothing had been changed since the 1950s. There were these old wooden stadium seats bolted into the ground, and this stage was rimmed with these kind of raggedy Ohio State flags. The men entered, they were wearing denim pants, short sleeve collared work shirts. Most of them had hair that was high and tight, but some of them had long braids and ponytails. There were a lot of neck tattoos and knuckle tattoos. And they sat down calmly. They looked at me, sizing me up in a way that I have never before experienced in my life. What could I do? I played. Just played the songs. I played one song after another for these guys, and I just spilled my guts to them in between. I told them every dirty secret that I had and every nasty thing I ever did, all in some attempt to win their trust and to receive my own forgiveness. Towards the end of the show, I got ready to play a song about my dad, but first, I told them the story about the night my father and I almost killed each other. I told them about a wound I was carrying that I felt would never heal, and about things that I had done I was pretty sure I was never going to be able to make right. When I finally started to play, I got choked up, and like a total amateur, I stopped in the middle of the song, apologized to them, and I asked for permission to start over. A man covered in tattoos sitting in the front row of the auditorium. He looks up at me with this sly smile. He turns to the other guys in the room, turns back, and he says, "We all make mistakes." Now that story can make you want to laugh, or it can make you want to cry. But the truth is, at the time, that day, the roof just blew off the place with laughter. And everybody's hearts got a little bit lighter. I will always be grateful to those men, to the reckless sons of Chillicothe, because after that gig, I knew what it was I had to do. It was finally time for me to go home. Well, I've been trying to talk with my old man. He says he knows me better than I'll ever understand. But still he can't explain the things I've done, or what it's like to be the father of a reckless son. For all the years I made sure I was numb, all the liquored up conversations where I played deaf and dumb, and for all the screaming angels in my heart and in my head, not a word was spoken until my father said, I can't hide you from your own hands or lift you from your knees, but I'm preparing myself to have to dig your grave. We'll both be humbled by the will of God and the wrath of your disease, but how could any man have to be so brave to know that nothing can be done? The father of a reckless son. Alone inside a family where we pass around the blame, where you can keep your interventions. All you gave me was my name, waiting for the moment where I can meet you with my fists, but punishing myself is the only thorn that I could twist. 'Cause you can't hide me from my own hands or lift me from my knees, and you're preparing yourself to have to walk away. We'll both be humbled by the will of God and the power of our needs, and all that's left for you to do is pray for all the battles that you won. You're the father of a reckless son, and I know you've had to see me walk into the rain when you knew you couldn't pull me back, no. But your love was never shown to me in vain. Put your arms around me and the walls begin to crack, but I know I'm the only one who can do what must be done, yeah. So with every breath in my lungs, you're the promise of a reckless son. Ooh, yeah. The promise of a reckless son. I have played hundreds of concerts in jails and in prisons everywhere from San Quentin to Rikers Island, all the way to the Gunnison prison in the middle of the Utah desert. And everywhere I go, there are more of us, more reckless sons, plenty of reckless daughters too. But when I listen to them, the concerts become more like conversations, and everything I see and everything I hear and everything I feel, I put into these songs. They tell me their stories, and now I'm telling you, so that we can continue to bring healing through the arts to those behind the walls. Problems we face are far too large for any one person to solve, but I'm grateful I've been shown a way to do my share. And that's what I was always looking for. That is what was always missing. I don't do this to pay a debt, and I don't do it because I've been sentenced to it. I do this because it sets me free. And if just one person gets something out of the gig, if just one person connects, feels seen, feels heard, feels a little less alone, it's worth it. I think I asked too many questions. I know I'll never understand how to help all those around me. I am just one man. There's so many who feel helpless, that there's just too much to be done. But I know it makes all the difference. That revolution has begun. Yeah, if I can help just one, and he can help just one, and she can help just one. If we can help just one. I'll put my heart into my labor. I'll burn my back under the sun. I'll share the harvest with all my neighbors. I'll work until my hands are numb. If I can help just one, and he can help just one, and she can help just one. Help just one. Just one. Thank you very much, everybody. That's been an excerpt of my show, Reckless Son.
Thank you, Matt. That was wonderful. It's just so good to hear you singing again.
Thank you.
Sidney Meyer of New York City's renowned venue, Don't Tell Mama, called the show a profoundly moving performance, both heartbreaking and inspiring. And I much agree. I know you performed there last year. And you called me last summer saying you were going to be performing at San Quentin. You performed at some 50 prisons and said over 100 shows, but the number of shows really more than 150 now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I sort of long lost count of how many performances I've done inside jails and prisons. But the amount of facilities is around 50, and the list keeps growing.
And mostly by people that are inviting you, because word of mouth spreads. So you get invitations as you did from San Quentin. Is that right?
Correct. I was invited to come out to San Quentin. It was actually a teacher at San Quentin had heard some of my music on her husband's internet radio show, and they found out about the story, and they mentioned it to the warden's office there, and I got invited to come in and perform. It was an amazing experience.
And was it, I mean, as you said, every time you walk in, it's a little frightening to go into a new jail or prison. What was that like at San Quentin, such a notorious prison, as many are?
San Quentin was, first of all, it's sort of a living, breathing piece of American history. There's, you can sense, how long it's been around and sort of the heaviness of that environment. But I would say, though, that once I actually entered the chapel where the performance was and met the crew, the sound and stage crew were all incarcerated residents of San Quentin, and they were incredibly warm. I mean, really also an incredibly professional and great stage crew. But once I actually got into the performance space and met people, the environment was incredibly warm, disarming, and friendly. The staff, the Rafaela from the warden's office who arranged the show was wonderful, and the crew, everybody was great. The audience was great. It was all around a really truly positive experience. The places are very intimidating, but it is not uncommon to find a lot of warmth and a lot of laughter during these shows.
That's great. That's great to hear. I want to point out that the United States is the world's leader in incarceration now. And according to the Sentencing Project that advocates for racial, ethnic, and economic and gender justice, and you can find out more at the sentencingproject.org, that there's been a 500% increase over the last 40 years in people in the nation's prisons and jails, and that changes in sentencing law and policy, not changes in crime rates, explain most of this increase. So the trends have resulted in prison overcrowding and fiscal burdens on, states to accommodate the rapidly expanding penal system, despite, evidence that large-scale incarceration may not be the most effective means of achieving public safety. So it's an interesting group, but I also saw an interesting statistic that if recent incarceration rates remain unchanged, an estimated 1 of every 20 persons will serve time in prison during their lifetime. It's kind of a scary thought to think about how much it's increased, in the last 100 years.
Those are statistics that I have not heard before. I believe them to be accurate, but they're still those are shocking numbers, to say the least. That's very powerful to hear that.
I know that Bob Roth, the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation, said of you, Matt Butler is a brilliant singer, songwriter, and a deeply honest and honorable man. And this just proves what you just said. And I know this so much from working with you because you are very careful with your facts and figures and also so honest and deeply devoted to the work that you do. You've performed at events by the David Lynch Foundation and many others, Columbia Center for Justice, American Folk Arts Museum, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And then you were the artist in residence at the Kripalu Center in the Berkshires and the artist in residence in the HB Studio in Manhattan. So tell me about the HB Studio. Reckless Sun was developed in part by the HB Studio Artist Residency Program, wasn't it? And workshopped at various prisons. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, the opportunity to be artist in resident at HB Studio was really critical for me. I have a purely musical background, in the sense that I grew up playing in rock and roll bands, and then I've been sort of this folkier singer-songwriter for a few years. But the only theater experience that I really have is being in my sixth grade play and singing in the chorus at some Gilbert and Sullivan plays that were in my old middle school. So not having really any theater experience, but doing a show that really is, a theater show, I really needed some guidance with that. And so HB allowed me to use their theater, which is sort of a historic place, down on Bank Street. It's one of the oldest and sort of most well-known acting schools here in New York. And there was some particular chemistry because they have a teacher there named Richard Holler who teaches the theater workshop in Otisville Prison, and also, runs an acting company called Acting Out, which is comprised of all formerly incarcerated actors. And so Richard has tremendous experience doing this kind of work inside correctional facilities. And he also, knows on a heart and emotional level, why this work is not only so important, but why it's so rewarding, why it's such a deeply rewarding service to do. So I had an immediate connection with him as a teacher, and it was pretty quick that Richard graciously agreed to direct Reckless Son, and I'd never had the experience of doing any kind of blocking, or I was still figuring out what was stage left and stage right. Was it his left or hit my left or what?
Right.
I got a real crash course in how to really do a proper theater show. Before this, Reckless Son was just something I could do in a club. I could do it in a prison. I could do it in your bedroom. It was just me and a guitar, but I had never really put it together the way that you actually got to see it at the Marsh, with stage projections and, in a real setup. And then as far as working it out in Otisville and in Oregon, and then I worked out this show. The first time I ever did it in its entirety in a correctional facility was in Virginia at the Chesterfield County Jail. But it was very important to me that if I was going to sort of claim, this role of telling these stories, telling this group of people's stories, it was very important to me that I make sure that I was performing it for them first, and to make sure I was doing it with them first, to make sure I was handling this in a way that was not only respectful and with humility, but also with real authenticity. And so I have a lot more confidence performing this material for the public, knowing that that there were guys at San Quentin, there were guys at Otisville, there were guys at Chesterfield, and women too, that were behind me, that are happy that I'm doing this work and believe in the show.
Now, Reckless Son is presented also as a residency. Is that right? And tell us about the residency and what that includes.
Sure. So the way I think the show is actually most effective is when it comes to a location, if it's performed sort of in multiple phases, where I typically, what I like to do is perform the show inside a correctional facility, and then perform it for the public, somewhere in the surrounding community, and ideally try to sort of bridge those two worlds. An example of which would be when I performed it at the Chesterfield County Jail in Virginia. The sheriff was actually very moved by the show, and the sheriff's department actually rented out their local performing arts center, the Perkinson Center. And when I performed Reckless Son, a few gentlemen who had been formerly incarcerated in the Chesterfield County Jail, who were also singer-songwriters, performed music that they had written while they were incarcerated, and about their experience of incarceration. And then they actually were able to bring another gentleman out of the jail who was currently incarcerated. They actually brought him out in custody, and he was able to perform on stage at the Perkinson Center as well. And simultaneously, there were lots of the staff from the facility, a lot of peer volunteers, recovery coaches, a lot of the family members of the incarcerated, and then just members of the local community and local businesses all came. And the show sort of became a way of facilitating larger community event that I think, on one level potentially demystifies the correctional facility a little bit for the community and put some faces on things, and also hopefully, provides an opportunity to create some empathy in the community, because obviously these are individuals who are eventually going to be, released, and they're going to rejoin that community. And so, there's hope that it can catalyze some kind of compassion and some form of reconciliation as well.
And so some of these are publicly ticketed events with formerly incarcerated guest speakers and performers from the local community.
Yeah, exactly. So ideally, when I bring the show, I'm there in that location for at least a few days, if not longer, and able to present the show in a few different places, and like I said, really try to bring people together.
That's great. So it's rehabilitation centers and reentry programs and schools, and always post-show discussions, Q&A, and information about how to get involved.
Yep, yep. I know people tend to have questions about the experience, but also, people want to sometimes other artists, throughout the years, other artists have reached out to me and wanted to know how they can potentially get involved in doing a similar service.
That's lovely. And there are different people. I know you have friends in Oregon that do teaching and at the facility or in Oregon. And you worked with them when you were in San Francisco last summer.
Yes.
Um, and so I know some of the other states do the same sort of things. And you also, along with correctional facilities, speak and perform at universities, high schools, and retreat centers. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So, you know, it really is, as you have described in your write-ups and your beautiful press kit that you have. I love the electronic press kit. That it is a story of hope, forgiveness, and what it means to discover a deeper sense of purpose through service to others. You're raising awareness, shifting perspectives, and empowering individuals to create change within their communities. And this prompted you to start a nonprofit, Art That Serves. Tell us about Art That Serves and what's happening with that.
Sure, sure. Well, Art That Serves came about primarily because I was traveling so much to perform in these correctional facilities, and a lot of very generous people were, willing to support that endeavor, and it seemed like, there was an opportunity to give that some legs, and so we got a 501c3 actually in 2018, but it's been a real mission of mine in the more recent years to what I would say is sort of pay forward the opportunity that I've had to do this kind of service work and to, enable and facilitate other artists to do something similar, because I felt that, my experience, the experience that I've had and continue to have, has been really, truly transformational for me. And like I said, over the years, as I was doing this work, I used to get a lot of messages on social media. A lot of artists would reach out and say, this is a great thing you're doing. How is it that I could do something similar? And so at this point, we're looking for other artists who are sort of doing creative and unique projects that ideally can actually be co-created with the incarcerated. And then similarly, as I'm doing with Reckless Sun, presented to the public for a similar effect, in order to bring some awareness, to give a voice to a population that often does not have a voice, and to try to, like I said, shift some awarenesses, in different communities. And ideally, we're looking to do this, the areas that we take Reckless Sun to, we're trying to inspire artists in those localities to want to continue to do service work in those correctional facilities. And we're always looking for people that are doing interesting work. So if there's anybody on this live stream that's interested in doing this kind of service, please don't be a stranger, and definitely reach out to me.
And you'll be able to reach out through, and we've posted it in the chat, the Matt Butler songs.com, and they'll have your information about how to contact you there. So are the prisons and jails open to this Art That Serves? Are they generally very receiving of this concept and having more shows and other artists come through?
Yeah, my experience is that correctional facilities are not necessarily uniform in their policies, and there's state facilities, there's federal facilities, and county facilities. My sense has been is that there's a lot less uniformity to what the cultures of each facility are like, than I would have necessarily expected. But I have met some incredible administrators and sheriffs and wardens and commissioners, and superintendents that are really, that see the value in this kind of work and see that art and music and literature and theater, that these things can reach people in ways that they can't necessarily be reached otherwise. That there's just a way that art affects people's, their heart and their spirit in a way that other things don't. And I have found that there is there is a lot of willingness to bring arts programs into facilities, and there have been some really incredible things that have been done in correctional facilities over the years.
Absolutely. Recently on Solo Arts Here, we hosted Susan Magsamen, the founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And her bestseller from 23, a New York Times bestseller, is Your Brain on Art. And it focuses on how we use the arts to solve problems in health, well-being, and learning, and the importance of art in healing trauma and PTSD and so many aspects of our lives. And this is exactly what you're doing with your work. The healing power of the arts is wonderful.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll have to read that book. Thank you for mentioning it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So who are some of your people that inspired your music? Who are some of the artists that inspired your music?
Sure. Well, I think, one of the artists that I was most probably profoundly impacted by as a young man was Bruce Springsteen, and his the characters and his storytelling have really meant a lot to me for a very long time. And similarly, his show Springsteen on Broadway certainly gave me some ideas for Reckless Sun. I think the actual experience of of what I did, of what this show is based on, the traveling and all that was, inevitably the archetype for that is Woody Guthrie, and this sort of archetypal, really what a folk artist, what a folk a traveler, a folk musician is. Woody Guthrie is really the icon for that. And so I think I wasn't exactly riding the rails per se. I wasn't getting on boxcars when I was doing this work, and I kind of make a joke about that during the show that being a cross-country hobo is a lot easier when you have an iPhone rather than having to hitch rides on boxcars and things like that. But I would say that kind of a thing, and that kind of imagery, Dust Bowl and Grapes of Wrath and all that was always in my head to some degree when I was creating the show and thinking about the feeling that I wanted the people to get from it.
That's great. I'm happy you got the recognition you did as one of the Spin Artists of the Year, and also the Album of the Year, and Good Company with John Mellencamp and Peter Gabriel and others.
Yeah, pretty wild for me.
Yes, well deserved. And I know you now are also writing poetry, and you have a new collection. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I have always enjoyed poetry and always felt that it was something that I would. There's obviously a commonality between lyricism and songwriting and poetry. And it's always been something, like I said, that I've been fascinated by, and I certainly consider myself, an amateur poet. But a lot of times I'll write, when I'm traveling or when I'm home in between writing songs, and I really appreciate learning about poetic forms and some of the craft of it. And so I wrote a sonnet cycle a little while ago that that I felt was inspired by sort of the grieving process, but also this idea of rites of passage and renewal, and in the springtime now, so it's certainly a nice moment to reflect on some of these. And then a lot of it is also influenced by Japanese poetry and forms like haiku and tanka and haibun poetry, and I just wanted to put a collection together. It's something that I've always dreamed about, and so I just went ahead and did it.
And the title is?
It's called The Sonnets of Becoming, and I actually have a copy of it right here.
Lovely.
Yeah, and they're available on my website.
Available on through your website, and also all your music and Reckless Sun. You can find a lot of pretty much all of the music is there, is it?
Yeah, everything is accessible through my website, and then it's all up on Spotify and Apple Music and all the typical streaming platforms.
Wonderful. You said you started your first show, was it 2018 when you performed at Albany?
2016.
2016, pardon me, 2016 Albany Prison. And so prior to that, tell us a little bit about your earlier work. You were a musician for many years and performed all over, and how that compared with some of the new work you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I mean, I grew up in Manhattan. I grew up in New York City and playing in what I guess I would describe as punk rock bands on the Lower East Side, and got to play places like CBGBs and things like that, and did a bunch of regional touring. Was in a band at one point that got to tour in the UK. I was actually in a band called Reckless Sons, so that's a little inside joke that some people are aware of. But when I grew up, I wanted to play loud and fast and aggressive music, and that was definitely how I felt as a young guy. And I felt that as I got older, some of the things that I wanted to say changed, and inevitably, the kind of music that I was going to write had to change as well to reflect, what were my internal changes. And I still have some of that music lying around somewhere, and it can be fun for me to dip back into, but it feels like it was a whole other life, a whole other person.
Well, it seems you really found your niche here, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad of it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it does this. I describe it in the show that this has really felt like a calling for me, and I think that that's accurate.
Hmm. Yeah, uh I was looking at some of the statistics. Yeah, the statistics for incarcerated are really alarming, and your work is certainly cut out for you because I imagine it makes a huge difference to have a show like yours in a facility, and that the more people you can, I'm glad you're calling for more people to join you and people within communities to join, to be able to do this important work, and also making, as you put it, putting a human face to people that are so often forgotten.
Yeah, it's for me. It was an experience that once I became aware, I couldn't sort of go back. It's one of these things that I can't pretend I haven't had the experience that I've had. If that makes sense.
Mhm, mhm. So, you have a performance coming up. Tell us about, you're going to be at a performing arts center. Is it in Kentucky?
Yes, the next performance of Reckless Sun for the public will be June 28th in Louisville, Kentucky at the Kentucky Center.
Very good. And how, are you wanting to play more in theaters as well, or just really continue to do this in prisons, or I guess both at the same time?
Well, interestingly, I mean, I will always want to continue doing the service in correctional facilities, but I wrote Reckless Sun actually. The intention behind Reckless Sun was something to perform for the public. I've always wanted to tell these stories. For years I've been going into correctional facilities and hearing these incredibly poignant, profound stories from people, and I have always felt this, this desire, almost an obligation to want to get these stories out, and I wasn't necessarily sure of how to do it. So eventually, it was suggested to me to do a show like this, and so I put these stories together, and I want to do this for the public as much as possible, and I think doing it in the way, in this sort of residency model is a great way to do it. And so when I perform at the Kentucky Center, I'll also be performing at the Kentucky State Reformatory.
Oh, okay, very good, perfect.
But this is definitely a show that I want to do for the public.
Wonderful. Well, we had you at the Marsh right before you played San Quentin, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
And we hope to see you back. And I know you told me a story about a certain song. Was it Lucy? What is the name of the title of the song?
Yeah, there's a song, Tell Lucy That I Love Her.
Tell Lucy that I love her. Tell us that story.
Which story are you
In
referring to?
terms of you had said that it was exactly how someone was feeling when they heard that song.
Oh, yeah. Well, the story that I tell in the show is, it's a heavy story. I performed it in the Chesterfield County Jail, and actually there was a video taken of it, and my tour manager at the time took a video of it on his iPhone, and the video went up on YouTube, and it actually got a bit of virality, and somebody sent me a message, saying that they had been listening to the story, they'd been listening to the song over and over again, and that their husband had just committed suicide inside of a county jail, and that they had a 3-year-old son. And she was saying that she felt that the song described exactly how she knew that he felt at that time. And hearing that from her, was really humbling and profound for me, in the sense that I kind of felt like I was playing all of a sudden in a very high stakes world, which I obviously understood that to a degree beforehand, that this was very serious stuff. But that moment was very intense for me, as far as just, understanding the real extremity and the intensity of the stories that I was hearing, and the world that I was entering and participating in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call that out unexpectedly, except that it is such a moving and poignant story here, and in terms of the people that you're affecting on both sides, the people in prison, the people that you're performing to, because you're really touching a lot of hearts and a lot of bones when you're reaching, telling these real stories that many of us relate to, and incarcerated and otherwise, I'm sure. So kudos for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Gail.
Hmm. Do you have anything else that you'd like to? The time always flies by, and is there anything else that you'd like to add, or that we haven't talked about, that you'd like to mention, Matt?
I, you know, I appreciate you mentioning the poetry collection. That's a new thing that I'm very proud of and very excited about. So thank you, and I guess I'll just say thank you, Gail, for having me. Thank you, to Stephanie at the Marsh for hosting me here, and at the theater itself, and thank you to Brianna for running the production here, and just thank everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate you giving the show your time and your attention.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. I look forward when you're back in the area, and I do hope more artists will be joining you and your good work with Art That Serves. They can get in touch with you on your website, mattbutlersongs.com. And Brianna also has posted the Sonnets of Becoming and other merch from your website. So do take a look at that, everyone, including the Reckless Sun press kit that has a lot of information for you. So with that, I'd like to say a special thanks to you, Matt, especially, and with thanks to our producer, Brianna Caver, and Marsh founder and Artistic Director Stephanie Weisman, the Marsh marketing team and crew, and always to you, our Zoom and YouTube audiences. Art heals. Look for upcoming Solo Arts Heal show on the Marsh stream, where you may see announcements, become a member, visit our tip jar, and join the mailing list at themarsh.org. Thank you again. Thank you, Matt Butler. See you all next time.
Thank you so much.